American industry is totally dependent, and agriculture, on this cheap and sometimes illegal labour. And if he tries deporting 2 or 3 million people, a lot of American business would simply collapse.
It is. It's not just me, though. The Times' former diplomatic editor and very fine lead writer, Michael Binyon, is with us here in the studio. Binners, thanks for being with us.
Thank
the
you.
brilliant Tessa Dunlop, historian, author and broadcaster, also with us. Tessa, thank you. Should we talk about Donald Trump and his first full day in office today? Gosh, he's a man on a mission, very busy, been very, very busy, signing executive orders, soaking up the love, doing his very best in performance politics. But look, it's working. He's wasted no time setting out his plans. So far, he's declared an emergency at the southern US border, along with dozens of other executive orders on climate change and immigration.
First,
Donald Trump there, what we know that he's done in the last few moments is reinstated the Remain in Mexico programme. That forces asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for the resolution of their American cases. It was halted by Joe Biden soon after he took over at the White House, but the Department of Homeland Security reinstated it with immediate effect. And he's also given permission for border officials to raid schools. This gives you something of the temperature of this and the extent, I suppose, which Donald Trump's prepared to go for in immigration, which there's no doubt about it, Michael, one of the big pegs for Donald Trump. It was the economy and immigration which got him over the line and into the White House.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the Americans have been worried about illegal immigration for some time, but the scale is completely off anybody's imagination. I mean, it's enormous. And it's not just Mexicans fleeing, violence and poverty and whatever in their country. It's much of Latin America tramping through Mexico, Central America, tramping through Mexico to the US border, waiting for a chance to get across any way they can, and sometimes assisted by gangs and particular kind of couriers who sort of help them, guide them to the right place to cross. And it just infuriates Americans. I can see why. I mean, one doesn't have to be racist about it, and I do think you've got to try to deal with this in a humane way.
The immigration issue infuriates Americans,
yes,
rather than Donald Trump's actions.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's what infuriates people, because they say, when these guys get here. Now, the difficulty is that American industry is totally dependent, and agriculture, on this cheap and sometimes illegal labour. And if he tries deporting 2 or 3 million people, a lot of American business would simply collapse. I mean, people say, we don't like them, but actually they're quietly hiring them to do jobs they don't want to do, or where they can't find anyone to fill the slot. And so in the heartland of America, these illegal immigrants are very, very important. There have been amnesties every so often to try to start again from scratch. And a lot of people have got citizenship. It never really works. It doesn't reduce the demand. People still come. And why not? Because you can see a very booming and prosperous country just across the border compared to your own poverty and misery where you are.
Tessa?
Of late, I've had to revert to the Enlightenment philosophers just to stay sane. And I've rediscovered Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talked about the will of the people. And then he caveated the idea of the will of the people, reminding us that actually very quickly the will of the people can become the tyranny of the people unless there are checks and balances. We know what happened. There was French terror. Meanwhile, America, of course, established a much more constitutional republic with lots of checks and balances. And by goodness, they're going to be tested. But one of the things that Rousseau was so worried about, of course, is that while, a more absolutist form of government can make trains run on time, although I'm not sure there were trains in his day, but it's not so good at perhaps looking after the vulnerable and deciding who should or shouldn't belong to a nation. What concerns me most is that Trump, appealing to the will of the braying mob, it's the language he uses, the performative flourishes. We saw them from Elon Musk, the sort of the direct provocations. Yes, you'll have peace in Gaza, but let's just trigger it over there in the West Bank. Actually, just the language he's using about the way in which he's going to term illegal migration, so that if it gets the sort of terrorist status, that could arguably, I notice certainly in the Times they're discussing this, Times newspaper they're discussing this, lead to potential military incursions into Mexico, those raids in schools. Is this really necessary? This is red meat to the braying mob. So let's just pray for those American checks and balances. But also, a lot of it is hot air. This is a man who says he's going to make America great again. It's also a man who had 4 years with his hand on the tiller and more factories closed under the last Trump administration than opened.
Okay.
And what really matters in America? The economy, stupid.
There was one market-moving announcement after another as Donald Trump started his new term as US president. From vowing to unleash fossil fuels to ending support for EVs and hitting pause on a promise of sweeping tariffs, the pledges kept coming.
America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it.
With US equity markets shut for a public holiday Monday, it fell to Asian and European investors to give the first response. The moves proved surprisingly muted. Japan's Nikkei index ended the day modestly higher, while South Korea's Kospi and China's Shanghai Composite indexes ended broadly flat. Shares in some big exporters weighed after Trump indicated tariffs could still be coming, if not on day one. Hyundai Motor, which has a plant in Mexico, was among the fallers, losing about 1%. European shares then opened flat. Rising healthcare and financial shares offsets broader losses coming from uncertainty over Trump's proposed tariffs. European major automakers felt pressure though. Stellantis was down around 2%, while Volkswagen, BMW and Mercedes all fell too. Oil traded gently lower amid conflicting signals. Trump's promise to drill baby drill suggested higher supply ahead. But he also cut incentives for EVs and promised to refill US oil reserves, potentially boosting demand. The reaction on currency markets was more marked. After a dip following the lack of action on trade, the dollar then recovered some ground following Trump's signal that tariffs were probably still coming.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
The Canadian dollar and Mexican peso both fell versus the greenback in response.